Okay, on the show today, the one, the only Zuby. I first came across Zuby years ago when he broke a women's deadlifting record, I believe it was. And I just like the humor of it and also the truthfulness of it. He's an entrepreneur. He's a rapper. I was listening to him in the gym today, rap music with clean lyrics. I really enjoyed that. Podcaster, he's interviewed Elon Musk. He's been on Joe Rogan. I think it's 2 million followers on social and 50 million online views. Really a personality in media. So Zuby, welcome.
How's it going, Mark? I appreciate the invitation.
Going well. Let's hear a little about your life. How did you get into what you do now?
Wow. Well, where do we begin? So quick backstory. I was born in England, grew up in Saudi Arabia, went to boarding school in the UK from the age of 11. And then when I was 18, I studied at Oxford University. I did computer science and I started rapping when I was in my first year of university. I'd been a hip hop fan probably since I was about 12 or 13 years old, but it wasn't until I got to uni that I started writing my own stuff and making my own music. After I'd been rapping for about 10 months, I released my very first album, which was called Commercial Underground. So I put that out when I was in my second year of university. And that was really when the spark went from the idea of doing music as a hobby to doing it as something potentially as a profession. I remember I went and at the beginning, I just pressed up 50 CDs. So this is back in 2006. This is prior to streaming. This is before iTunes was a big deal. So everything was still physical media. So I just pressed up 50 CDs and I sold them all in about a week. And so I took that money and I went and I made 200 CDs and I managed to sell all of those. So I was like, okay, cool. Let me go and make 1,000. And after selling maybe about another 100 or so, that was when I realized I had sort of exhausted my circle of people who were around me in my vicinity, who I knew and who would want to buy my music, partly in a large part just because it was me and they wanted to support me. So I had all of these boxes and boxes of CDs, and it was like, okay, what do I do? I need to start going outside of my social circle and I need to start getting these out to uh, strangers, essentially. And so in the past, I had bought CDs, albums, and mixtapes from independent artists on the street, primarily in central London. And so I thought, hey, I can do that. I can go out there and I can stand on the high street and I can talk to people and I can sell my music that way. I remember the first time I ever went out to do it and how scary it was. So just I actually was in Leicester Square in London of all places. So it was quite the baptism by fire. So I was there 19 years old with my backpack and I think I only had like 5 or 6 CDs with me. I was just thinking, okay, let me see if I can even sell these. And I managed to sell them all. Took me maybe about 20 to 30 minutes to do the first approach, but once I'd gathered my courage, then I realized, hey, this is something I can do. So I came back the next day with 10 and I sold them all. Came back the next day with 20, sold them all. And I spent an entire summer. This would have been, gosh, let me get my timing right. I think this would have been summer 2006. And I spent much of that summer just out and about on the street, just talking to strangers, playing them my songs and selling them my CDs.
Mhm.
So that was really how it all started. That was really the beginning. People who knew me before the current incarnation of all the stuff that I do, anyone who really knew me prior to 2019, as you said, with that viral deadlift video, would have known me just as being a rapper. I wasn't doing my podcast. I hadn't written any books. I wasn't talking about social issues, cultural issues, political issues. Not at all. Maybe a tiny bit in my music, but not outside of it. So I went full time with my music in 2011, just continued to travel around the UK. I put on my own independent tours, continued to sell my CDs on the street, and then eventually in shopping centers, along with my merchandise. And as you said, in 2019, I had a video go super viral, and that put me on a lot of people's radar all around the globe. So I'd been doing all of this work for the previous, what would it have been at that time, 12, 13 years to get my name out there and to get my music out there. And then lo and behold, the thing that millions of people discovered me through was a funny 9-second deadlift video. So it's funny how these things happen. but a lot of people discovered me and my music and everything else I do through that. And it's just gone from strength to strength over the last 5.5 years.
Interesting you talk about sales face to face. I've interviewed quite a lot of leaders at different levels, and a lot of them started off on face to face sales. I think there's something about maybe, as you say, like plucking up the courage to talk to strangers. It's very un-British. And you're very interesting to me culturally because it's one hand, it's like public school, Oxford. On the other hand, it's like Nigerian background, Saudi Arabian, some influence there. So that very un-British thing of selling, which the American guests I think do much better. And from the embodiment point of view, you actually have to read people, right? Like you're in Leicester Square, you're talking to people, you've got to be able to tune into them. So can you say a little bit more about that? Because it is part of a lot of the story of leaders that I talk to, actually.
Yeah, I'd love to talk more about that. It's funny, not a lot of interviewers ask about it because it's such an integral part of how I got to where I am now. And I think that because 99% of people who now know me discovered me after 2019, they sort of missed this previous decade where day in, day out, I was making my entire living by talking to strangers. I mean, I sold over 30,000 albums hand to hand in the UK.
Wow.
And you can imagine how many people you need to talk to
Yeah, yeah.
sell 30, right, to sell 30,000 albums. So I was just out there quite literally talking to hundreds of thousands of people. I would estimate I've spoken to between 400 and 400,000 and 500,000 people if I were to
Well,
um, put a guess on it. So what specifically would you like me to expand on?
I'm curious about that because I had a friend that did the charity thing where they used to try and sign people up,
Mhm.
and another friend that was into pickup. And what I was curious as an embodiment coach talking to him was just his level of ability to read people and see what
Mhm.
was going on. And also just culturally, it's very unusual to approach people in that way, to sell or, charity thing, whatever it is. I believe there's a skill set people build from that.
Yeah, there is, and it's a rare one because it's a hard thing to do. And one of the great advantages of hard things is that by default, most people, if it's voluntary anyway, most people won't do it.
Yeah.
So if you want to stand out and you want to possess skills that few people have, you generally have to be willing to do things that most people don't want to do. I mean, it's kind of funny that that viral deadlift video is a sort of metaphor in itself because there are people who would like to think, oh, he just posted that video and went viral. And there's a point even in it. It's like, okay, you go lift that weight.
Do you want to say what that is? I want to talk about weightlifting as a hard thing. But for those who didn't catch it,
Uh-huh.
essentially you identified as a woman for a minute
Yeah, yes.
and
Okay,
he's a big guy, but you broke the women's deadlift and it proved the point, right? It said, hey,
yeah.
if we're just going to subjectively identify as whatever we want, if there's no criteria around it other than that, the silly things can happen. And in a way, it's come full circle now with the boxing in the Olympics
Hmm.
that people have realized less jokingly, perhaps there are some fairly serious consequences to a kind of postmodern identification culture.
Yep.
What was your take on it? Tell us what you did. Where are you at with it now?
Yeah, sure thing, man. So I'll give some context about it. So when I posted that tweet, this was February, I remember the date, February 26, 2019. I was running one of my pop-up shops in Derby in the UK. And it was in the morning, and it typically doesn't start getting busy until around 11 a.m., 12 p.m. So I had that couple hours. I'm just kind of standing there scrolling through Twitter, keeping my brain occupied because there aren't any customers to talk to. And I had seen over the years, I mean, I really started to notice the rise of this issue, particularly around 2015. I think that's when it really went mainstream, the idea that anyone can just identify as whatever gender they want to, and all of the pronoun nonsense and everything that everything that comes in that basket of woke gender ideology. And I'd seen various situations. For example, in MMA, there was a fighter named Fallon Fox who's a man and who identified as a woman and caused some very serious injury to a female competitor. I want to say that that was around 2016 or 2017. So I'd seen that. I'd seen various situations, particularly in the USA, in high schools and in college, where male athletes were beating female athletes by identifying as a woman and competing in their competition. And right off the bat, I'm just like, this is totally insane. And this is back at the time where it wasn't quite on so many people's radar, or people were more in denial of it. So I was just, my brain, funny way it works, was just like, I wonder what the British women's deadlift record is. Like, I've got a very, very strong deadlift. I mean, I had an elite level deadlift. So I Googled it, and in my weight class, it was 250, 210 or 215 kilos. And my PB was 275. So I was like, I can pull more than 100 pounds more than the female record. So I already had a video on my phone of me doing 230 kilos just from one of my training sessions. So I just posted that clip, and I said, I keep hearing about how biological men have no strength advantage over women in 2019. So watch me destroy the British women's deadlift record without trying. P.S. I identified as a woman whilst lifting the weight. Don't be a bigot. So I just posted that. I had 18,000 followers on Twitter at the time. I thought it was going to get a few laughs. I did not know that it was going to go on and receive millions of views and be seen like by super prominent people, including Joe Rogan, Piers Morgan, Tucker Carlson, Ben Shapiro, just all of these different pundits in the UK and as well overseas. And it just became this, it just became this sort of internet cultural moment. And I think the reason why, part of the reason why I think it went so viral, there's many reasons to it. One is that it was on a lot of people's minds, but not a lot of people were talking about it. Or those who were, they were trying to come with all the scientific arguments and use logic and reason to explain why this wasn't a good idea. There was supposed to be the Olympics, the 2022 Olympics coming up. So it was also a conversation that was happening around what should the rules be around transgender athletes, right? Should people to be able to compete against whatever gender they identify as, or should it be males with males, females with females, and so on? All those conversations were happening. There were conversations happening at the political level, amongst feminist groups, at the social cultural level, just at all these different areas. In the sports world, it was a conversation. So it went viral in all these different sectors. And it wasn't just in the UK either, because it wasn't just a UK issue. It was happening in Canada, in the USA, in Australia, across all of these different Western nations. So it was just sort of this meteor. And then when I had the opportunity to go on some of these different channels and do these interviews and do these podcasts, that's when people were able to learn more about me and my way of thinking and discover all the other things that I do. So I think that's why it took off in the way that it did.
One of the words, Zuby, I talk to people about interviewing you that I hear the most is sane. They say, this guy's really sane. I heard you say something about this in another interview as well. I said, oh yeah, that guy's sensible, which for non-English listeners is a high compliment to call someone sensible. It's sort of, God, he's just sensible. And what makes it that you can be sane or sensible or make other people feel sane and sensible in our slightly crazy postmodern age?
Wow. Well, firstly, thank you. I appreciate that. I'm also a bit disheartened that simply being sane is now a compliment, being called sensible. Do you know what I really think it is I would say it's a combination of three things. I think it's a combination of sanity and sensibility, along with courage,
Yes.
and along with having the verbal skills to communicate things that are controversial or emotionally charged or rather complicated in a simple and concise way that people can understand it. So
And
I think that,
right? Because you're
yes,
very articulate, and you're also, I don't hear a hint of hatred or malice in your
no,
voice when you
yeah.
talk about these topics.
Yeah, and it's why I'm able to speak about them very honestly without any sort of fear about what's coming out of my mouth, because there's no malice or ill intent or hatred behind anything that I say at all. And so I don't have to kind of worry about that slipping out, right? If I had some evil agenda or some genuine hatred in my heart or something like that, I'd always have to be super cautious about my words, making sure that, oh, I don't accidentally let it slip that I have this sort of hidden animosity. So I'm able to just talk very frankly and freely. And even if people disagree with me or they challenge me or they play devil's advocate or anything like that, I don't stumble over it because I'm able to articulate why I believe what I believe. And I don't have an agenda beyond trying to get to the truth and trying to encourage and inspire people and just nudge the world and individuals within it in a better and more truthful direction. If I have any so-called agenda, that's all it is. And so I think those factors together are sadly quite rare. I think there are people who see the issue, but they're not able to articulate it. I think there are people who see the issue, but they lack the courage to say anything about it. Then you have people who are courageous and they're not worried about being canceled, but they're just too aggressive or hostile in their way, or they have another agenda. And so people don't really want to listen to them. So I think it's those things combined that's allowed me to really build the following and have the impact that I have over the last few years.
I'm wondering about that Venn diagram because I hear a lot of people come on the show who are scared to talk about things, or they'll even
Mhm.
ask me, "Hey, could I mention COVID? Can I mention that?" I said, "Say what you want. We've got no sponsors.
Yeah.
It's fine. Say what you want." And like one is, as you say, part of that is just sincerity. That there's people feel that, and even though sometimes it's easy to be hopeless, I feel like most people are decent and they can feel decency. They can resonate with decency. Resonate people resonate. Like, okay, this guy's basically decent, even if I disagree with this politics or religion. I know you're a man of faith, and my sense is that helps with being fearless. Is
For
like
sure.
you fear a higher power rather than cancellation.
Yeah.
And the other
I've said before, I'd rather be canceled by man than canceled by God.
Right, and it's good to
Yeah.
have it means that essentially no one can threaten you, right? Because it means that any threat they give you, they'll always be the big boss who can give you a bigger threat. So it's
Mhm.
or a bigger hope. And the other one is you're a black guy. I think you identify as a black guy. Good shit we have to say these days. Um, in that you were saying things I think as a black man that would have got white guys cancelled because people would went through that stage of saying as a black woman or as a person, like they would identify first and then as a way to defend themselves. So
Yeah.
in a way, it's a perfect storm of sort of Oxbridge articulation, moral courage, religious foundation, and big black. There's a few factors in. Is that unfair? Tell me if any of that's unfair.
No, I don't think it's unfair. I don't think it's a major factor, but I do have something which I call my melanin force field. So if it's about certain issues, I can just say what I want to say without feeling like I need to cushion it or give five different caveats before I say what I want to say. I actually genuinely encourage people not to do that, by the way,
Yeah.
because I think it weakens people's arguments and positions. And I think it plays into this idea, which I don't like, which is that the veracity of your statement or the accuracy of your observation is somehow based on your immutable identity, as if,
Yes.
two
Yes.
people can say something that is true, but it's more true if it comes from this specific demographic and it's less true if it comes from this other one. I don't really I don't like that idea. And I think if we were to sort of take it to its conclusions, we'd end up in a very stifled society where no one can say anything because you're not in the exact specific demographic. It's just a bit silly to me.
Well, it takes out the notion of dialogue. I mean, if I were to kind of support it, kind of what's the word? Not straw man, the opposite, Iron Man it. I'd say steel man it. I'd say, okay, so who's saying the statement does matter? I mean, Nietzsche kind of said, hey, who the philosopher is does matter. The kind of Greek idea, if it's all just logic and reason, isn't the case. But it's certainly gone a bit far. And now people talking about lived experience and my truth and,
Yep.
these kind of subjective kind of, they're really just claims to say, everyone else, please shut up, right? They're saying,
Yes.
I don't need much.
It's a weapon. It's a weapon to silence people rather than something that is, look, of course there can be people who have more direct experience and more authority to speak on certain subjects.
Yeah.
There's no question about that. But the idea that someone is not allowed to have an opinion or that they should sort of be excluded from the conversation because they're not the right demographic, to me that's just silly, and it's actually It's very illiberal and regressive, ironically.
Right, right. If we were to take the I identify thing to its conclusion, its logical conclusion, its extremist to see if there's, issue with it or not, where would that go? So, for example, could I identify as Zuby? Could I be you? Or could I identify as not existing? And if you look at me, that's a form of bigotry because you're, micro. Like, what would be the logical conclusion of saying, because subjectivity does matter. It does matter how we feel on the inside. Certainly gender is partly how we feel inside out. It's not just the objective. Both of those are parts of being human. What might be the logical conclusion? Because the sort of deadlift stuff and the Olympic stuff now, I think, is actually pushing where that line might be. And very good natured people are like, well, hang on a minute. I do support gay rights. I do support people's right to call themselves Sharon or wear a dress or whatever. But there comes a line. So where do you think that line would be?
Yeah, it's interesting what you just said there, because again, that's one of those caveats that people like to use, right?
Mm.
Like, oh, I do support gay rights, I do support trans rights, but it's like, well, when you say you support trans rights, what does that even mean, right? Trans people are human beings. I don't think that they should not have any rights that you or I have, right? Like, I don't think they should get extra rights or extra
Right, right.
privileges.
Yeah.
But as a person who believes human beings have fundamental rights and value, and I believe strongly in the sanctity of life, I'm like, yeah, obviously, like as a human being, I support your human rights. But that doesn't mean you can. This doesn't mean you can force people to participate in your, in this case, I would say delusion. But even if it were not something that were just a delusion, just any belief system, you can't force everybody else to affirm it and participate in it. Okay. So let me take the belief that I hold, which is the most fundamental belief in a sense that I have. Certainly one of the most important ones, and one of my most guiding principles. I'm a Christian. All right. I'm a person of faith. Okay. So I have a right, and any reasonable person would agree that I have a right to practice my religion, to read my Bible, to go to church, to congregate, to have conversations with people about what I believe and why I believe it. I can live my life in peace, and I can be a Christian. Other people may be atheist, they may be Muslim, Hindu, Jewish, lots of different religions out there. However, if I were demanding that everybody else, regardless of what they currently believe, must believe the same things that I do and affirm what I say, and they must accept Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior, and they must say these specific words because I am demanding it, what would people call me?
Right. A bigger, because your rights end with you. You could,
I'd be a religious extremist.
right.
They'd say that guy is a fanatic. He is an extremist, right? You'd be immediately labeled an extremist. But when it comes to this woke ideology, the whole basket of it, right? Not just the transgenderism issue, but also some of the conversations about race, some of the extremes that people are going into now with the LGBTQ plus movement. A lot of these ideas, it's not just, okay, these are things that someone wants to believe, or this is the way somebody wants to behave, or how they choose to dress, or something like that. It's no, everybody else must affirm and validate and say, you must refer to me in a very specific way, even when
Not
I'm
just
not in the room.
not just validate, that would be sort of therapeutic fascism. It's
Mm,
actually ontological fascism. It's saying you have to say this is real.
yes.
You have to believe this, which is, for me, that's even a step more than compelled
Mm,
speech or, something of that nature. That's a
mm.
far more sinister.
That's a great term you just used there. What was that? Ontological fascism?
Ontological for
That's a
philosophy
bar.
of being. Feel free to take that and
That's a
put it
great
on Joe
term.
Rogan. Give me a
That's a
hashtag.
great term.
Yeah, ontological fascism. All right, change of pace now. Let's talk muscles. So we've got a lot of
Okay.
people listening to this who are either young guys who lift weights, or they're, maybe older women who dance or do yoga, they do something physical. Why would someone as busy as you are, with the potential to earn as much as you do and speak to the cool people you get to speak to, why would you, instead of calling Joe Rogan or Elon Musk, go to the gym? why would you spend time? Look, I'm playing devil's advocate here. So why would you spend time going to the gym?
Man, I don't think I'd be where I am if it weren't for the gym and the strength training that I've been doing over the past 20 years. I had a tweet literally a few days ago where I just said that it's one of the few things in the world where it's all upside. There's no downside. I mean, someone could say, "Oh, well, you have to watch what you eat and you have to put in effort in the gym." I wouldn't say those are even downsides. Um, Man, there's so many reasons why I love the gym and strength training.
Top
Where do
three.
I even begin?
Top
Top
three.
three?
What would be your like if you lost them, you'd be really sad.
Okay.
If
Okay.
suddenly the gym stopped working in three domains.
Okay. The first thing I'll say is, let's just say health, broadly speaking. A lot of people say that they don't have energy to exercise, and the reason they often don't have energy to exercise is because they don't exercise. It actually gives you way more energy, improves your longevity, obviously improves your strength, cardio, physical endurance, all of that. And so many health benefits, reduces the risk of certain rates of cancer, reduces the risk of diabetes, reduces the risk of osteoporosis. There's no downside to, there's no health downsides to it. So that entire basket of health is a massive factor. The second one, I would say, if I'm gonna do three, the second one I would say is that a lot of the lessons that you learn when you build your body and you get stronger and you get more jacked, you can apply the exact same principles to other areas of life to achieve success. When you see someone who has built an impressive physique, or they've got themselves up, we've got the Olympics going on right now, no matter the sport, you've got someone who has trained to that level to get their body in that condition, you can, it tells you something about their character.
Yes,
It
yes.
tells you something. Oh,
Yeah, Mike Israetel disagrees maybe slightly on this. I kind of challenged
okay.
him on this. That on the one hand, it transfers into other things.
Mhm.
You apply a program, you work hard, you have rest, you have activity. And on the secondly, it's an indicator, an imperfect one, of certain virtues. And this is why
Yes.
when I see, I don't know, the British 800 meters runner who just won a gold, I don't know anything about her, but I can guess she's got discipline. I can guess she's got focus. I can guess she can get herself up in the morning. Yes, she may have talent, like you may have more talent than I have just genetically with your cheating Nigerian genetics, for example. But you know, that's just part of it. So we know at least we can guess that she has some talent. So
For sure.
is that was that what you're getting at here? The idea that it indicates virtue.
Yes, it indicates virtue, and you already said it, right? So what does it take to get in it? Let's just use weightlifting. Right? What does it take to get incredibly strong and to, build up your muscles, especially if you do it naturally and drug free, right? It takes discipline, hard work, effort, and consistency over a long, prolonged period of time. You have to be able to delay gratification. That's a major one. You actually need to be able to resist a lot of social and the social and cultural tide, because the social cultural tide is not pushing you in a direction of being healthy and eating well and exercising
It's
regularly,
more
right? So
impressive now. It's more impressive
yes,
now than it was 20 years ago.
yes, yeah, exactly, right. You have to swim upstream. You have to deal with setbacks. You have to deal with injuries. You have to be patient sometimes. You have to be hungry sometimes. So it's the same thing with building a business. It's the same thing you could even say with having a relationship, a long-term relationship that's healthy. So you can take those same lessons and you can apply them to other areas of your life to achieve success in them. So I'd say that's the second one. And the third one I'll say, and this one's a little bit left field,
Okay.
but the third one is, one thing I love about physical training is its objectivity.
Yes.
It's right. It's
That's
so
lie.
it
Steel doesn't lie, man. Henry
yeah,
Rollins said that.
exactly right. The iron doesn't lie.
Love it.
So it doesn't care about your age, your race, your sex, your ethnicity, whether you're poor, whether you're rich. It does None of that matters.
Mm.
The weights are they weigh the same every single time. Every time you pick it up, it's the same weight. So whether you are making progress or you're staying the same or you're regressing, it's just an objective measure that you can't blame on anyone else. It's not even a team sport, right? So
Notice the
it's just
joy we
you.
have in this. Like both of us are sort of lighting up. If you're on the podcast, you won't be able to see it, but we're both like happy saying that this is like it cuts the bullshit, it doesn't lie. Why are we so happy? Is it because the world is very confused that there's a dishonesty to life? There's something about like, okay, God's rule of gravity, of weight. Like, why are we so happy saying that? Like, I'm genuinely curious.
Because we're increasingly living in a time where objective reality is constantly being debated.
Yeah.
There are people who would actually claim it doesn't exist. We've already acknowledged that many things in the world are subjective, especially opinions and viewpoints. But they, in this time, people are arguing about objective reality itself. And I think with the way that both traditional and social media are, people get siloed off into echo chambers. And someone who has a certain worldview is consuming a certain type of content, which is reaffirming it and perhaps not challenging it. And then you get that on the opposite end, no matter what the situation is. And so increasingly, it seems like the population, at least in the West, the populations are polarizing. You see this very obviously in the political sense, but I think also in other areas of just people's read on society and on culture and on people themselves. It's very heavily influenced based on what they're consuming and what they're being fed by these algorithms. And when that gets too extreme, I think it gets quite dangerous because people lose track of reality and people view individuals and groups as their enemies when they may not be, and people can quite easily begin to hate each other and fall into a level of tribalism that's deeply unhealthy. And it can happen on virtually any topic. It doesn't matter. I mean, a few years ago, the world nations were being divided, families, friendship groups were being divided based on whether or not someone had taken a particular injection.
Mhm.
Um, Prior to that time in my entire life, I don't remember friendship groups ever being split apart
Civil War, man.
because,
Wasn't it? Yeah, families.
right? But
I had cousins unfriending me on Facebook.
yeah, exactly, right. So it
Baby.
so it really indicates that people can become tribal over pretty much everything. I mean, maybe we've already seen this, right? You see this with people, the sports teams that people support, whether someone uses a Mac or a PC, right? Like
Yeah.
there's always going to be individuals who just take that tribalism way too far, and it moves on from just being banter or a fun point of disagreement to being something where you actually hold like a real animus for anyone who doesn't fall directly into your way of seeing things. And that's not good for this society.
So we have tribalism, which has always been part of human nature, but perhaps has been made worse by media, which means we're not all watching EastEnders. We're not all watching the same media. So it's kind of deepening it. We have the kind of breakdown of the Renaissance subjective, objective, intersubjective distinctions, which sends everyone crazy because, you know, liberal modern Western culture is based on those distinctions. And it's a self-contradiction to say there is no truth. You know, that is a truth statement. So
Yes.
it's clearly just will send you crazy. Um, let's talk a little bit more about weights. Earlier you talked about it's hard.
Mm.
If you deliberately do something hard, one, you may gain something from that most people don't have. And you've already filtered people at that point, right? So yes, it builds virtue, but there's also a selection bias for who will do it in the first place.
Mhm.
Um, what is it about doing hard things today? People love their cold showers now. Weightlifting is super popular amongst the bros. Thank God. I love all the kids who do the weights in my gym. It's full of 16-year-olds. So on the one hand, people are doing really hard things deliberately, you know, the ice baths, the cold showers, the breath holds. And on
Mm.
the other hand, we live in this time that has never been easier. And if I get even the slightest bit of just, if you know, if my Wi-Fi doesn't work on a plane, I'm bitching about it like within 10 seconds. I'm like, what do you mean the Wi-Fi doesn't work? So what do you mean you don't have decaf? You know, so on the one hand, we're like seeking all this hardship, but on the other hand, we're kind of soft. Let's be honest. My
Mhm.
granddad would just, I don't know about your grandpad, but my granddad would just laugh at me at how soft I
Yep.
was. He was an Irish immigrant. Yeah, where are we at with hardness and softness and deliberately doing hard things?
That's a fantastic question. I think the former is being driven by the latter.
Mhm.
Sometimes when I'm in the gym, particularly if I'm on the treadmill or I'm doing a cardio machine, I sometimes laugh at myself.
Right.
because what you're doing when you're in a gym or when you're walking on a treadmill is you are essentially mimicking the behaviors of labor. You're doing an artificial version of something that our ancestors would have just done completely naturally
Yes,
for their own survival, right? So in the past, I mean, the idea that you would deliberately be expending calories unnecessarily would
crazy.
be absurd, right? Because calories used to be hard to obtain and very expensive. We now live in an age where calories are extremely cheap and always abundant, right? When was the last time we had a famine? The concept doesn't even really exist in the modern Western brain. Whereas in the past, it was whether hunting and gathering, farming, things were just, life was just a lot harder. Life was just a lot harder. And so, because we live in such a technologically developed and soft and easy time, I could quite literally not leave this room for months and I could continue to make a living. I could continue to obtain food. I
Yeah,
could continue to
absolutely.
even have social interaction with other people. Right? It would be super unhealthy, and I would never do it. But I could technically survive without leaving this room. Certainly not without leaving my apartment.
Mhm.
And that's a really new phenomenon. That's only in the past few decades that that concept has even existed. So I think in light of that, if you do want to be healthy, you now have to go out of your way to do hard things physically, mentally, spiritually, even if you want to just connect with people. With the rise of working from home, the rise of remote schooling, all of these type of things. Again, in the past, when you were growing up, if you wanted to have friends and you wanted to entertain yourself and talk to people, you had to do it in the real world. You couldn't just sit on a sofa or and just stare at a screen for hours on day and have all of these interactions. So I think the more we move away from nature, the more the people who are more, let's say, unplugged or enlightened and who can be bothered, they're going to want to do more hard things. And that's going to be a necessity just to maintain a level of physical well being, a level of emotional and mental well being, healthy relationships, social skills, all of these kind of things, which in the past you would have just had almost by default because you had to, because you existed in a society and you had to survive. Whereas now it's become a lot more optional. So you have to go out and do the hard thing. And by the way, to add one more thing here, I think this is a rarely discussed reason for the massive rise in various types of mental health issues, in
Yeah,
particular anxiety and depression, because our biological wiring is not different from our ancestors. So we have better stuff and we have fancier equipment and we have a more comfortable life. But biologically, we're hardwired the same way. We're still hardwired to be chasing after an antelope or to be farming all day long or to be out there doing all of these things. And if you don't have real threats, I think your brain starts to. I'm not a psychologist here. This is a theory, but
it
I
makes
think
a lot of
yeah,
sense.
your brain starts to manufacture it, and it starts to magnify minor threats into very major ones. I've said in the past that the reason why people care about microaggressions is because we don't have enough macroaggressions. When you have real things to be concerned about and real things to be anxious about and real enemies to fight and things to deal with, you don't have time to sort of sit around and selfishly
Yeah,
dwell
yeah.
in your own brain
We have a
and
negativity bias, and if we're
yeah.
looking, we are scanning for threat, and if we can't see any obvious threat, we start to see threat where perhaps there isn't any, or there's very minor threat, and
Mhm.
it becomes a level of fragility. I relate to what you said about exercise. And my first job was working on farms, and when I see like functional fitness in the gym, it just looks like a whole lot of farm labor to me. Like I see what people are doing, and I'm just like, oh, I used to get paid for that, dude. It's kind of bizarre. And yeah, I wonder if almost two types of people develop. Because with you can make life more and more comfortable where you get weaker, but you have more and more comfort. And unfortunately, you get diminishing returns on that, right? Like in terms of dopamine and other kind of systems. Or you can do difficult things sometimes, and that kind of resets some of the systems, like the dopamine system, and means you actually enjoy the other stuff more, and you can tolerate the bad stuff more. But it almost feels like society's kind of dividing into two tribes of the hard things and the people who want the easier things all the time, and no microaggressions and no like little upsetting things. They're two fundamental strategies for dealing with suffering, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely. One of my greatest predictions of this century is that we're going to see human bifurcation on different levels in a way that we've never seen it before.
I want to see the Olympics where everyone has gills and wings and rugged up and has like electronic arms and shit. I want to see that Olympics. It's going to be awesome. But right,
Yeah, there's okay, go ahead.
let's talk mindset. So I've heard you talk very positively about a mindset for success, and you've done well, and you've
Mm.
clearly done well. Like everyone, a mixture, some luck, some talent, but clearly a lot of hard work as well. It's always that mix for anyone, I find, right? Very few people get by with one or even two of those. Let's turn it on its head. Let's say there's a young guy listening to this and you wanted to give him just the worst advice possible. You were the
Mm,
sort of evil uncle, and you were
okay.
like, what, I'm going to give you the worst advice because I want you to have a mindset that will lead to failure.
Hmm.
What would be your sort of yeah, worst possible advice for a young person watching listening to this?
Okay, I would say broadly to instill a complete nihilistic mindset in them
Mhm.
and just convince them that none of it matters. None of it matters, right? You're just an irrelevant ape on a spinning rock, hurtling around, glowing ball of fire, and there's no up or down or right or wrong. There's no point in really pursuing anything because none of it matters in the long run anyway,
So if you take
now or
out
later.
meaning, if you take
So
out
I
meaning, take out purpose, and you take out
yeah, take out meaning, take out purpose, take out direction. Just, hey, just, do whatever you want. There is no meaning of life. I think if someone fully gets absorbed into that type of mentality, or even strongly absorbed into it, then it becomes a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? If you can convince yourself that, well, I don't matter and other people don't matter and my life doesn't matter and it's all just meaningless, then I mean, why would you be motivated? It makes no sense to be motivated if that's really your worldview. So I
so
think if
yeah.
someone could be, yeah, I think if someone could be sort of fully indoctrinated into that mindset, that would probably be the worst. It's not advice per se, but I think that would be one of the most dangerous mindsets that they can have for themselves and for others. I could give a few things that are like more specific and sort
The
of practical as
complete
well, if you'd like.
nihilism, which would probably lead to hedonism and narcissism. There's a couple of sort of they'll probably be going down the roads of hedonism and narcissism without
Mhm.
meaning. And what about just in terms of agency and feeling like you can do something? That's kind of related to that. But I've heard you talk very eloquently about the best mindset is something like the one where you go, you know what, even if I'm up against it in various
Yes.
ways, I can make a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, so I think regardless of who you are and where you are, and whether you're a man, a woman, you're white, you're black, you're Asian, you're straight, you're gay, whatever you are, there is a victim narrative for you. There's an argument that you can make that you are some type of victim based on your circumstances, based on your characteristics, based on your family situation, based on the country you were born in, based on the social class you were born in, your abilities or lack thereof, whatever the case may be. I could make an argument. I could make a very solid argument that all of us are victims in many, many ways, even if not of each other. We're certainly under various systems from the government and the financial systems
Yeah.
and fractional reserve, right? Like taxation, inflation, all of these things going on where we don't, there's a lot of things that are unfair. And you could take it to an even more cosmic level and just talk about the suffering that exists in the world and the fact that we all get sick and there's random accidents and it's not fair and children get cancer and people die and bad things happen to good people, right? You could form a real narrative that life is super unfair, unjust, and we are all victims. So I understand why someone may fall into that type of mindset. So the way I look at it is someone may have various grievances. Some of them will be legitimate. Some of them I may consider less legitimate. But let's take someone who has, let's imagine a person who has like real legitimate grievances and things that are make their life an uphill battle in many ways. Let's say they were born into a family where, they have, let's just say they have crap parents, right? They've got bad parents who don't care about them. Maybe they're on drugs, maybe they abandoned them, whatever the case may be. They grew up in a rough environment. Maybe they're, let's take it outside the West even. Let's say that they're in a much poorer country where there's not the type of opportunities and upward mobility. In those type of situations, it's like, okay, all of these cards that are dealt, you can't change them. None of us pick our birth circumstances. And we don't pick our nationality, we don't pick our ethnicity, we don't pick our race, we don't pick our gender. We don't pick a lot of things, right? We've just got our DNA. And so it's like, okay, given all of that, across all of these different billions of people and their different circumstances, what is the best mindset to adopt, regardless of who you are and the hardship done by you? Is it better to assume that, okay, well, this is my lot in life and I'm a victim of my circumstances and I don't control any aspect of my destiny and I'm just being pushed by various forces, other people, the government, this group, that group, whatever it may be? Am I going to adopt that? And for the decades of my life, I just live like that, just floating away. Or would it be better to adopt some type of, you could call it extreme ownership or massive responsibility and accountability and say, okay, I can't control everything. In fact, I can't even control most things. I certainly can't control other people, and most people massively struggle to even control themselves. So I'm going to do my best, given what I have, to control the aspects that I can control and to live a useful, righteous, purposeful, meaningful, moral life. To me, the best option, no matter the situation, is always the latter.
Right. And not only no matter the situation, if I look, there's a correlation here that goes the other way that people might expect. So being something of a victim is in some ways a luxury belief. If I look at my own team, for example, the East Europeans who live in, some quite poor countries like Hungary, or the two Indians I employ, who, India's middle class in many ways, but it's still not the West. They actually have a more responsible agentic mindset than some of my West European and North American employees. And I'm like, guys, so my friend Testify, who literally grew up in a mud hut, one of the most jocko kind of, it's a luxury belief to not think that in a way.
Yeah, because you can get away with it more, right? The more comfortable society and culture is, the more you can get away with having an awful mindset and continue, but yet you can continue to survive and sometimes even thrive. Whereas if you truly are in a bad environment and then you have that mindset, like, you're going to get crushed. You're really going to fail.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I have to tell
We
my East European and Indian employees to take holidays. I'm like, take
yeah.
off. It's like,
Yeah, it makes sense. It's why there's that sort of immigrant mindset, and it's not
yeah,
like every immigrant has it, of course, but
sure.
it's well known that lots of immigrants who go from developing countries and they move to the UK or the US or Canada or whatever, the work ethic is on a different level because it's just like, well, and I think people also know, people have maybe perhaps a closer bond to the sacrifices that were made before them. I think
Yes.
that's something that also comes in that sort of immigrant mindset. Although you shouldn't need to be an immigrant to have it. But I often think, we touched a little bit about how our ancestors would think that, we're weak and we're pansies or whatever. But, I often just think of the sacrifices that were made
Same.
by my parents and their parents and going back in time and just thinking of the kind of stuff that some of it I know that they lived through, some of it I have no idea what my ancestors 100 or 200 years ago in Nigeria were up to. But I imagine that, you know, living in Nigeria in the 1800s or in the 1900s would not have been, I mean, if you were to compare that type of life and the hardship that people dealt with to whatever that kind of hardship I think I'm dealing with, one reason why I don't complain about my life is because it feels like a slap in the face to God and to my ancestors. Like I look at my life and the situation I'm in, and I'm almost like, how could I have the audacity to
Let me
come
tell my
on?
Irish immigrant volunteer World War II submarine piloting granddad and my Irish peasant ancestors. My girlfriend works for NGOs and she spends a lot of
Okay.
time in various sub-Saharan countries, and she's
Mm-hmm.
just got a wonderful sense of perspective and gratitude.
Good.
And I think because she sees that, and then
Yes.
when we're in Italy or the UK, it's not always apparent. Equally, I think about 50% of my guests are from immigrant families, like Mike
Mm.
Israetel, yourself, myself. I could name 10 guests who are from immigrant families. There is something about having the resources of the West, or, places like Dubai that are developed, combined with the mindset of developing nations. Something about that combination is
Mm-hmm.
pretty invincible.
And do you know the other aspect of it for me as well is I very much recognize that I am blessed and fortunate in so many ways that billions of people are not. And I think it is incredibly important for me. And to me, this has like a religious component as well. For me to do my best with my God-given gifts and talents and opportunities. I very
Yes.
much recognize that most people do not get one, let alone of the many gifts that I've been given, not because of my hard work or my own greatness or anything like that, right? Just by dint of birth. And so while I am here on this planet, I feel like it's incredibly important for me to use that as a force for good and use it to uplift people, to help people, to inspire people, to motivate people. I can't do everything and I can't reach everybody, but I do have the ability to reach millions of people, and I am reaching millions of people. Most people never get a chance to do that. So if I'm going to be in that position, I can't squander it. It's like, okay, I have to do something. I have to do something good with this. I have to try to help other people reach their potential in some way, shape, or form. So for me, yeah, it's that Spider-Man Uncle Ben quote, right? With great power comes great responsibility. And I think I think that's a fantastic way to view it. And I think if everybody, whether they are whether they're in our field where, you're building an audience or not, whether they're online, offline, whoever you are, wherever you are, we all have unique abilities, talents, experiences, personality traits. We all have things that other people don't, and which we can use to help other people. And I think if everyone sort of realized that and did their best or tried to do their best to use those things as a force for good, that's when I think that as a human species, we would just elevate to a whole other level. But I just think there's so many distractions out there and so much anger and tribalism and various things that it keeps people. I rarely use the term consciousness, but it keeps people at a low consciousness. It's
Yes,
kind of
yes.
preventing people from elevating up to a level where they surpass some of these very base instincts and very base ways of looking at things. And they're just like, oh, actually, we can all be a bit more enlightened. And actually, I can be a bit more useful and I can treat people a bit more kindly. And actually, you know what? I do have this skill and I can teach this thing and I can help that person. So I'm daily, I'm trying to do that. And I'm constantly trying to think of new ways that I can do it and see how I can reach more people and help more people. And ironically, funny thing about this all is the more you do that, the more successful you also tend to become. Because
Yep.
if you can help a lot of people and do it in a real way, whether that's creating something, building a business, like you're not going to have a successful business if you don't help anybody, if you don't give people something that they need or that they want. So even a lot of innovation, I think, comes from that as well.
Beauty of capitalism. So we owe it to our ancestors. Maybe we owe it to God, responsibilities as well as rights. I really believe that from you. I've done over 600 interviews and I'm
Mm.
good at smelling bullshit. And I have a lot of people who come on and they say, I'm here to inspire the kids. And they're not. They're not. They're not in service to anything bigger. But with you, I believe it. I really believe
Yeah,
it.
thank you.
I think you're a
Thank you.
positive. Whether people listening to this, you may have been triggered, you may agree or disagree with Zuby, but I think it's hard to argue that he's a positive force with a message like that. So Zuby, thank you. Where do people find you? Where do people go to check out your stuff?
Sure thing. So you can find everything at zubymusic.com. There's links to all of the things that I do there. So I'm just going to give that one. And you can also follow me on all social media at Zuby Music. That is ZUBY Music. And you can find me on X, Instagram, YouTube, whatever it is that you use.
Zuby, thank you so much for joining us.
I appreciate it. Thank you.